All right. So, my normal question, Rachel, what am I going to ask? How is everybody doing? How is everybody doing? You guys having a good night so far? Not too hot? Good. Okay. So tonight we're going to be talking about shared and certified datasets. This is a new-ish feature. I've been meaning to present on it for a while. I just sort of got away with me. So I'm kind of excited to be talking about this tonight. How many folks have worked with shared and certified datasets? Anyone want to come up here and do this for me? No? Okay, good. So just a few of you. That's fantastic. So it'll be new stuff for a lot of people. Good. This is going to be kind of a low-level introduction, which I think is going to be ideal for most folks. Okay. So Power BI, Civil War Edition. Power BI, one of the nice things about it is it lets you solve a host of problems out there in the business universe, and it's going to let you try and solve two problems. The problem is those two problems sometimes look like one problem, okay? So one of the problems that you face in a business is having one version of the truth, right? So you guys have run into this before where you've got several different reports that disagree with each other, right? And that's a big problem. You just have to spend a whole bunch of time reconciling things. It's a big pain. So one of the things Power BI will let you do is sort of centralize the logic so that you just have one single version of the truth. Fantastic. The other problem it lets you solve is the notion of sane self-service BI, okay? What that means is people don't need to wait for IT to build big fancy models before they can do reporting. They can go build these automated reports that are nice and interactive on their own, right? And that's fantastic. The problem is a lot of people, when they sort of look at Power BI, their vision blurs a little bit, and these two things look like the same problem. The difficult thing is when you solve one of these problems, you make the other problem worse, right? You can't really solve one of them, you can't solve both of them at the same time. The closer you get to consistency, the further you get away from flexibility, and the more flexible you get, the less consistent you get, right? It's a constant trade-off, okay? So for a while, Power BI has had a sort of a solution for this, right? This is the analysis services solution. You guys familiar with analysis services? Some folks in the room? So analysis services is fundamentally the engine behind Power BI. But if you're an enterprise and you have SQL Server installed, you could build an analysis services model either on your own computer or up in the cloud. What it is it's basically a Power BI model that is managed and maintained by IT. The idea with it is that lots of different people can spin up their own reports, all connected to this centralized data model, okay? What's really nice about that? Well, there's one central data model, there's one version of the truth. What's the problem with it? It's big and it's kind of expensive, takes a long time to deploy, right? So if you're a large enough organization, it could work fantastic. But if you're a medium-sized organization or you just don't have the IT resources to spin up an analysis services model, it could be quite problematic, right? So the old approach is you'd have the analysis service thing, which is nice, but it's just really big and expensive. And that's good for your sort of one version of the truth reports. For other reports that need to be a bit more flexible, people would just spin off these one-off models, right? And that worked okay. Yeah, please do. Oh, wait. Oh, here we go. Mic coming.
Oh, sorry. If you have an analysis service model, you can still use Power BI to connect, but it's called Live Connect, right? So it's actually talking to the analysis services model. It's not its own model. You just sort of threw that out there that the reports you could build off of it. You'd be building them in Power BI through Live Connect. Right?
You still build the reports in Power BI, but all of the back-end architecture about like what are my different customers, what are my different products, what are my different business questions, those are all stored in one place. That way they get answered consistently.
And often the DAX is there, and you can actually add it in the reports too, but the DAX basically lives there, so that's where you get the single version of revenue or something like that. So.
Okay, so that brings us to our new solution, shared and certified datasets. It's spiffy. Okay, so what do shared and certified datasets let you do? Well, with shared and certified datasets, you can have semi-technical Power BI users. They can create their own sort of mothership datasets, centralized datasets that lots of other people can then connect to and build reports off of. So if there's a person on your team that likes to sort of roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty with data and do a lot of modeling, right? They could build this centralized model that other people who don't want to learn all that technical stuff, they could just connect to this model and build reports off it, right? The advantage is, A, like you've got the one technical person doing the technical stuff and the reporting people doing the reporting stuff, right? And B, you've only got one version of the truth to work off of. Very, very fancy. So what are some of the benefits of this? As I just mentioned, there's a single source of truth because you've got one centralized data set. You're always working off of that data set. So if you've got total returning customers in reports A, B, and C, it's always being calculated the same way because it's using the same measure because it's working off of the same data set, right? The nice thing about it is it could be used by other report authors. So people that have no idea what data modeling is or what DAX is or what M is, they could just connect to this thing and drag and drop and create reports just like you were watching a TV commercial or something like that, right? It's that kind of easy, okay? So those are two things that have actually already kind of been around for a while. There's two new things, right? Two new things. The first one is these are now usable across workspaces, right? That's the shared part of shared and certified datasets. So it used to be that you could connect to a data set and build a report off it, but it had to be in the same workspace as your report was going to be in, okay? So if you had a sales data set, right, and somebody from manufacturing wanted to connect to it to build a report off it, they could do it, but then they would have to publish the report into sales, which doesn't really make sense if it's a manufacturing report, right? Something like that, okay? So that's new, and that's super nice. The other thing that's new is the certified part of shared and certified datasets. This is idea of trust labeling, right? So because you've got all of these different data sets now that you could share with people, there's a way to put a stamp on each one of these data sets to say, hey, we've officially christened this. This is an OK data set for you to use in your organization. Or you could put a less official stamp and say, OK, my organization doesn't think this is OK to use, but I certainly do, right? That kind of a thing. OK, exactly. OK, so before you could build reports based off of existing data sets, but like I said, they had to be in the same app workspace as the report, which doesn't sound like a big constraint until you actually try and do anything, right? It becomes a huge constraint very, very quickly. This idea that you can have a data set that works across app workspaces is great, okay? And if you don't like that, maybe you like these graphics, okay? So here's the old way of doing it. This is sort of the easy mode. This is what people do sort of by default. In this easy mode, we can have multiple different workspaces. Like here we've got sales, and here we've got our big accounts workspace. And for each one of these workspaces, we've got multiple reports, but every single report has a data set tied to it. And a person had to build that data set, right? So this report here is tied to that data set. This report is tied to that data set. This report is tied to that data set. And this report is tied to that data set. In real life, you don't have to do it by color, but in this graphic, it's done by color. Right? That's how you extract those things. So what's good about this? Well, it's pretty easy to do. People don't have to think too much about it. They just open up Power BI, build a report, hit publish, and it does that for them. What's the downside? Well, what if this report and this report are fundamentally talking about the same thing? It'd sure be a lot easier if you just had one data set, right? Now, like I said, up until actually for a while, we've had this old way of working where you could have one person, this sort of technical person, they go ahead and they build the data set, and then other people can build reports in that same workspace based off that data set. However, if somebody else in this other workspace wanted to build a report off of this data set, I'm sorry, you just can't do that, Hal, right? You could do it, but they all had to be in the same workspace. So what's new here? Well, with shared data sets, you can have a data set here in this workspace for sales, and then over in your big accounts workspace where you'd want to have reports based off of your sales data set, these authors over here can open up Power BI and connect to this data set over in a different app workspace. And when they publish, everything works magically. Okay? By the way, I found out where the icons are in PowerPoint, so if you see like 10 billion of them in this presentation, there's a reason. I'm like, oh, wow, have these been here forever? Okay, so the truth, and also the truth. So just if I haven't successfully conveyed to you the importance of this, let's imagine a world where there's 3 people out there, and all 3 of these people, for whatever reason for their jobs, they need to know what the speed of sound is, right? Okay. Now, for 2 of the people, they're actually, one person is just curious about it. The other 2 actually need it for their job. So all 3 of these people, what they do is they all go out to different parts of their company. They find a big hallway with a wall at the end of it, right? And they get a stopwatch and they shout. They figure out how long does it take for the sound to travel all the way to the wall and come all the way back to me. Every single one gets that number. They figure out what the distance is. They divide the time it takes by the distance, and they figure out their own estimate of what is the speed of sound, okay? And this works pretty well, and every single one of them writes it down on their own workbook. But what's the problem we've got here? Well, there's 2 problems. Number one, each one of these people has a different estimate of the speed of sound, right? Because their stopwatches aren't perfect, and maybe the hallways have slightly different acoustic properties. So even though in the business we should have a single notion of what is the speed of sound, it should be a constant, because 3 people are doing that, there's 3 separate answers, right? Also, the other big problem we're having is we've got 3 people answering the same question, right? What we prefer is a solution like this, where you've got the one person who's really kind of a more scientisty person. See, I found the icons, it's a scientisty person. You've got the sciencey person, and all they want to do is figure out questions to generalize things, right? The other two people, they don't care about how to figure out what the speed of sound is. They just want to use it, right? So in this instance, this one person spends the time figuring out the question. They do a better job, and they write it down once, and now these other people don't have to recreate that experiment to use the results, right? More efficient use of labor, also more consistent across the organization. Okay, have I converted everybody in the room? Okay, good. Okay, so we've talked about shared and certified data sets. They work together, but they are technically two different things. Shared data sets are a feature that allow report authors to create Power BI reports based off of an existing data set, even if that data set is in a different app workspace than where they're going to publish it. That's the shared part. The certified part is putting a stamp on different data sets to say, hey, this particular data set, we've christened it official. You can use this for reporting, right? We think this is OK. Those are the two different things. Okay. So let's talk about some basics of how you set the darn thing up. So to turn it on, the hard part here is you need to convince your organization to make you the Power BI tenant admin, right? Sometimes that's a hard sell. If you happen to either be that person or know that person, all they have to do is head into the admin portal, right? And in tenant settings, they will find use datasets across workspaces. They will go ahead and turn that on, assuming that they want to do it, right? Now, notice down here we've got this apply to the entire organization or apply to specific security groups. So if you want to say, hey, I'm going to create an Active Directory group called approved shared dataset report authors who have been through a small training on how to do this stuff effectively, you could set that up right here. Or if you want to create a list of people who have been abusing shared data sets, you can have an abusing list, right? And there, where there's a little checkbox where it says accept specific security groups, you can say these people aren't allowed to do it, everybody else is fine. Looking at you, Steve. Okay, so that's setting up the shared portion, but the certified section is different, right? They're technically different things. Also very easy to set up, also in tenant settings, go to the certification section, go ahead and turn this on. Now what I want to note, let's see, did I put zoom in on here? Nope, zoom in's not on there. Give me a second, I'm going to put zoom in on. Yeah, let's go ahead and run it. There we go. Hooray, zoom it. Okay, so one thing I want to point out here, you turn this one on as well. For the other one, it's actually a little bit less important about this, whether you apply to the entire organization or specific security groups. Because if you give that to everybody, I would start out by doing that if I were an organization, but it's not the end of the world. With this one, you want to be very, very clear that not everybody in the organization is allowed to certify data sets, right? The entire idea of this certification process is there's a team or a select few number of people who are allowed to go in and say, yes, you set up the DAS correctly. Yes, you're using the correct tables. You're not doing anything funky. OK, stamp. You're good to go. You want to create either generally an Active Directory group that has those people in it, or if you're a small organization, there's only 6 people, you can just list them out by name. In fact, actually, I don't think you can. I think you have to use an AD group here. Right? But make sure you do that. That's extra, extra important here. Does everybody get that concept about why you do that? OK, good. Fantastic. I don't have to tell you twice. Also, there's this specify URL for documentation page. Okay. The idea here is, so you want to be able to certify data sets, do you? When somebody wants to go to certify a data set, right, if they're not in that Active Directory group that's allowed to do it, there'll be a little link that says, hey, would you like to know more? When you click that link, it goes wherever you type right there. Okay? So if you want to have a page that says, hey, in our organization, here's how you go through the certification process, here's how you contact, here's the form you fill out, that's where you make a link to that page. Okay? So, yeah, do not select the entire organization. Okay, so once you've done that, that's the hard part. Then all you have to do is the actual certification. Why don't I show you guys where that is out in real life, just so you can see that I'm not lying. I'm going to pop over here to Power BI. We're here in our tenant. I'm going to head up here to this little gear icon. Many of you have never been up here. It's an exciting place. We're going to go to the admin portal. And in the admin portal over here is tenant settings. We click on that. And then, let's see, where is it? Use datasets across workspace. We'll make sure that this is turned on. I recommend using specific security groups. This one, it's a little less critical if you're a small organization. Once you've turned on data sharing, then if we come down a little ways, we come down and find certification. They'll turn this one on. They'll probably want to paste in whatever the page is for their certification documentation. And most importantly, we're going to want to set this to specific security groups. Here at CSG, we've only got like 16 employees. This is just a demo. But in your organization, make sure that you set up specific security groups for this. Okay? All right, so that bit's pretty easy. Easier still is the actual certification process. So if you've built a data set, right, and you want it to be certified, right, all you got to do is find somebody that is in that list of people who's allowed to certify stuff, or follow the link to say, I'm going to fill this thing out. When the person who is a certifier reviews the data set and say, yep, that sounds fantastic, go ahead and certify it, what they will do is they will log in, Power BI, they'll go to the app workspace where that data set exists, right? So you'll go to that data set, you'll go find the data set, you'll click the little ellipsis and go to settings, right? And there at the bottom will be this endorsement section, okay? Now anybody can select promoted. Promoted just means I think anybody out there could use this data set. It's good enough that like you can go ahead and use it, but that's not the same thing as certified. Certified, only a small number of people are allowed to do. So if you're in the list, you'll be able to click this little radio box for certified. You can go ahead and add a description there so when people are connecting to it, they see what they're connecting to. And boom, you hit apply and you're done. Easy as that. Questions about that? Yeah, sure. Many questions. Yes.
What level of permissions to the workspace does the certifier need to have? Do they need to be a contributor, a member?
I think they need to be a member.
Member.
I think they need to be a member, but I'm not sure about that. Okay. Yeah. Other questions that I probably also don't know the answer to? Yes. Oh, there we go.
Is promoted the same thing as trusted?
No. Promoted is just its own thing. All it means is that the person who built the data set says it's okay for other people to use it. It's an indication that it's not so bad that you don't want other people getting near it, because it could be a disaster, right? I've built plenty of things like that, you know, right? So it's a level below, right? In some organizations, they might just sort of have a two-tiered system where we say, you know what, we trust people enough. Anybody that would be doing anything like this, they sort of know what they're doing. Promoted is like a low-level version of certification. It's still not official, but it's good enough that you can build reports off of. In other organizations, it might mean almost nothing, you know. Other questions? Over here, we got, we'll get the mic around. Hold on. Hold on, we'll wait for the mic.
One, I want the hat. But two,
yes.
Do you have a example that shows how a certified data set appears to somebody who might want to use it?
Oh, I'm so glad that you asked. It's on my next slide, but you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait. For everybody else that's asking questions, no pressure or anything. What else we got? There's one up here. Oh, okay.
So
Yes.
if you have a promoted data set,
Yes.
and you're in this particular case, you've got two data sets here in your slide example,
Yes.
and one is promoted and the other isn't,
Yes.
then how do you know the difference? So
Oh,
how
you
does
just
the-
have to memorize it. No, so I'm going to jump ahead to my slide. I lied. I said you were going to have to wait for this. Just to think this might clear a few things up. So when somebody wants to actually connect to one of these shared certified data sets, right, they're going to log into Power BI, right? They're going to go to Get Data. They're going to go to Power Platform, which was recently renamed. It used to be called Power BI. Now it's Power Platform. Hooray, platforms. They'll click on Power BI datasets, and what they'll see is they will see all of the different datasets that they have build access to. Okay? All the ones that are certified float to the very top. All the ones that are promoted float just underneath that. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Did I answer all the questions or just some of them? No, God, there's more. Okay, we have to do her next. She's waiting. Yes.
My question is this similar to the row level security that Power BI installed?
Ah, no. No, it's not. Very good question. This is, in fact, I wouldn't say it's the opposite of that. They're orthogonal is the word that I'm looking for, right? They do completely different things. So if you have highly secure data, right, it's possible that if you share a data set, if you don't put role of security in there, somebody could log into that report, and even though they're not a member of that workspace, they could still see the data because it's been shared. So if you have sensitive data, this is a very good time to enable role of security. Even if it's simple role of security that just has like one Active Directory group that says, yes, you can see this, if you have sensitive data, it becomes more important in a shared data set environment. Yeah. Front, center? Yes.
So can I categorize the certified, like if I have 6 members, so can I like assign this one to do this kind of job and the second one do this kind of job, like do specific rules and permission?
No, right now you've got a certification stamp and promoted. That's it. Those are the only two that you've got. If you want to have additional labeling, you basically have to do it through naming conventions.
This is so general, like if my dataset is big, so it's hard to like assign this kind of big like responsibility just for one person, or like
Well, you
if-
generally have a team. I mean, like,
even the team? So how can I know like this person give me certified for this specific job?
so I'm thinking I'm missing the question. So could you give me an example of that?
Like I have a data set and I need someone to certify this one because I have like a big database and we have 3 different environments. We have
Yep.
QA, UAT, and PRD,
Yep.
and all of these like process goes to like give me the final approve for the data. I have specific rules I need to go.
Okay, I see, yes. No, but we believe it's coming. So I've heard rumors of it. Basically what will happen is, assuming that the rumors I hear are correct, an API will be exposed for this process. So basically what will happen is when somebody wants to certify the data set, that'll fire off an API that you could connect to some other system that kicks off a whole process. And at the end of that long process that you could define yourself, that process will hit another API that says, okay, this data set is now certified. If you have something more complicated. Does that answer your question, or did I dodge it as well?
Almost.
Close. Okay, good. Close is good. Close is good.
This is kind of related. We both work for the same organization
Okay.
in different areas. So is the owner actually the person who has certified that data set? Up
Nope.
here?
Nope.
It could be anybody with the certification capability. In workspace permission.
Yeah, so the owner is just the person who owns the data set. It has nothing to do with who certified it. So there's not, I don't know if there's a paper trail in the logs in terms of who hit the certification button.
That's exactly what I'm getting to. So the owner might not even know who certified this data set in this example up here.
Yeah, I mean, that's a common thing. I think,
Understood, yeah.
generally speaking, the list of people who certify stuff, for most organizations, is going to be a very small list. You're probably going to know who that person is. My other dodge.
Is that kind of related to what you were talking about? Is there a question way back there, right?
So this is more of a caveman question, but like for
Yeah.
data sets, are we talking about a table? Are we talking about a model? Are we talking about like?
That's a very good question. I think there's probably a lot of people in this room that are like, I don't want to ask that. So thank you for asking. The data set corresponds to everything except for building the visuals, okay? So it includes the tables in the data. It includes the ETL logic about how to refresh those tables. It includes relationships between those tables. It includes things like measures and things like sorting columns and stuff like that.
And I can pull in the certified data set, and then I can also pull in link to other tables that I have and put measures in it.
No, you can't do that. So, in fact, I was just talking to my boss about that. There was an old solution for that, for mashup, that has kind of gone away. Part of the reason is that the idea is if you've got a certified data set, you don't want to be bringing other stuff inside of it, because then what does the certification mean? That would be their first answer. I think Microsoft will probably be surfacing ways to do a similar mashup to the way you used to be able to do it. I think they're trying to make it harder because it caused problems before, but they will have to surface some sort of solution for it, right? Yes. You can add measures.
You can add
Yeah.
the wrong measures. In other
But you
words.
can add the wrong measure. You're probably talking about actually like bringing in other tables from like mashup stuff. Yeah, right now they don't have a solution for it because they want to get it trusted first. I think once they clear that hurdle, they'll move on to like a good mashup implementation. If other people have answers too, please, yes. Chris probably does.
I talked with the data flows team, and they said this is coming as well for that other option there, data flows. So
That's what I meant to say. Yeah.
Just along the same lines. So, what would the path be then if you want to say add a single field? So, would you decertify the data set, add the field, and then have someone recertify it?
So what I would probably do, it's going to depend on your organization and how locked down you want to make these things. If you're a small organization that you trust the people that built the data set, and all they need to do is add a field, and that's not really going to mess with anything, you could just have them add the field, republish that data set, and it'll just work. Now, if you could also say, no, we have business rules that say once a data set has been certified, you're not allowed to change it without having to recertify it again. That could be something you would handle, but it would be an internal process that would do that rather than sort of a architectural process. Nothing in Power BI would stop you. No, business process. I have other slides. Go ahead. No. That was not directed to you. That was not directed to you.
This will be quick. What about the refresh?
What was that?
Yeah, the certification.
Yes.
And you refresh it tonight at midnight.
That's right.
So what happens? It's still certified?
It's still certified. Generally, the thing that you're dealing with certified is, are my relationships correct? Have I built measures that conform to our business rules? And basically, have I worked with corner cases in my data? So if somebody tries to use a measure in a place that doesn't work, it should blank out and not show anything. Those are the kind of things you usually worry about with certification. Or things like, am I using the right customers table? But usually if you're using the right customers table, that's not going to change with the data refresh. Either you're pointing to the correct one in the data warehouse or you're not. Yeah. Other questions? I deterred everybody. I'm sorry. Okay. There will be more, I'm sure. Okay, so let's see. Let's head back here. Everybody gets the idea. If you can just leave it as default. That's what most data sets are going to be. Anybody can promote it. That's easy. That's just saying, hey, it's not so disgusting that you can't touch it. Or it's pretty good. But like, if you want to make it official, you get it certified by somebody in that Active Directory group that is allowed to certify stuff. Okay? So when a person opens up Power BI and they connect to Power BI datasets, they will see this list right here. It will show them all the different datasets that they have build access to. The certified ones float to the very top. Just underneath that are the promoted ones. And underneath all of that other stuff is just everything else. Okay? Make sense? Okay. So once you connect, for anybody that hasn't done this before, when you hit that OK button, what you'll get is something that looks like a regular old Power BI window, but there's a few differences that are worth noting. Okay? So for one, down here on the bottom right, it'll say connected live to the Power BI dataset, whatever your dataset is called. Okay? So this data is not being stored on your machine. This data is stored in the cloud. Every time you interact with the report, Power BI sends off a new request up to the cloud. The cloud sends back a summarization that it then visualizes. Okay? Live Connect is what they call it. Okay? So in addition, you will see over here where you used to have 3 buttons, you now only have 1 button. Why do you only have 1 button? Because that's behind the curtain, and you're not allowed to go behind the curtain, right? You're not allowed to look at the raw data. You're not allowed to look at the relationships, because what would you be doing with that anyways? Your only job here is clicking and dragging the stuff over here to make visuals that you want. Likewise, up here, where we've got our get data buttons and our recent sources and enter data, those are also grayed out because you have no business doing that, right? That's the person who built the data set. Your only job is to build visuals. Okay? You can, however, for what it's worth, if you have, like, let's say that you've got a dev and a prod data set, right? If you look here, this button is grayed out except for the little downward arrow. You can't change to a different data type, but you can repoint to a different data set. So if you've got dev and prod, you can sort of flip back and forth. And assuming the column names and all the references are correct, it'll work just fine. For folks that think that doesn't apply to me, it probably doesn't. Don't worry about it. Okay. Okay. So when you build this data set, one thing that you may notice in Power BI that might throw you for a loop is it's going to add what looks to be a data set in the workspace that you publish the report to. Okay? Now, if you remember my claim before, you've got a data set over here. You could publish a report over here that points to this data set. That was my claim, right? When you publish this report, it will add a data set in this workspace. I haven't lied. I haven't been unfaithful to you. What it's doing is it's adding a stub data set. If you look real close, that data set has a little link in the icon. There's nothing in there except a link to that other data set in that other workspace. Bizarrely, you can't delete these. I spent about an hour trying to figure out how to delete these yesterday. You can't do it yet. Do you know how to do it? Not delete. Oh, we got to. Oh, okay, good. Yeah, okay, good, good, good. Nope. or maybe, but I couldn't get it to work. I deleted everything but that, and I'll show you in a minute when we actually log in, and like it's still there. Yeah. I bet you could probably do that. Other questions about this? Is there a question in the back? Nope. Okay. So speaking of which, let's see how this thing works, how this thing actually works. Okay? I think that's the last slide there. Yep, that's the last slide for that. So I'm going to head over to Power BI Desktop. So here in Power BI Desktop, I've got this retail sales data set, right? If I come over here to the relationship viewer, I've got a sales fact table. I've got an espresso stock fact table. So imagine this is like a coffee shop. We know all the stuff that they sold. Every night, somebody goes in the back room, figures out how many kilograms of espresso we've got. We've got that broken down by the stores dimension, the products dimension, and the date dimension, okay? That's our data set. This is what we're going to expose to report authors so that they could build reports off of, okay? So I'm going to head up here. I'm going to go to Home. Notice that I am logged in. I'm going to go to Publish. I'm going to wait. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find this workspace I created called Demo Shared Datasets Broadcast. This is going to be the workspace where we broadcast to the other workspace. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to hit Select. And it's going to push that dataset up there. I'm also going to wait again. And just like that, it's done. Hey, you got it. Okay. So now, if I head up to Power BI, I'm going to go to Workspaces. It's kind of hard to read these guys. The broadcast one. Oh, come on. Broadcast. Broadcast. I pushed it. Yeah, okay, there, good. There we go. So in that workspace is the report, which we don't even really care about. More important is the data set that got pushed up. So here's the data set that I just published. Okay. Notice it's got the same name as the file that I hit the Publish button on. If I head over here to this ellipsis, click on that and go to Settings, it'll take me to this window right here. I'm going to twirl open Endorsements. And because I added myself to the list, which is the easiest way to do it, is to make yourself a tenant admin, go ahead and I'm going to click the Certified button. And I'm going to give a really verbose, good description. Okay? I'm going to hit Apply. Okay, good. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to Power BI Desktop, do Control-N to open up a new window. Okay. Wait some more. This is the part of the presentation where I get to stretch out a little bit. Has anybody done this before, out of curiosity?
Waiting for Power BI.
Waiting for Power BI? No. Just a Microsoft product in general or a computer product. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go. I'm going to hit the Get Data button. Hit the Get Data button. And when I do, it's going to bring up this window right here. There we go. I'm going to go to Power Platform, and I'm going to choose Power BI Datasets. It's going to go scan the tenant and say, okay, let's go find all the different datasets that Brian's allowed to use. Right? And there's it is right there. Notice how the certified one's floated to the top? I've got a bunch of stuff down here, but it's not certified. It's not even promoted, so I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to click on Retail Sales, and I'm going to hit Create.
Quick question. When did the description show up?
I don't know.
Helpful right there.
Yeah, it would have. I might have clicked by it too quickly. So let me, never seen it either. So I went to Home and Edit Data Source Settings. Remember how I said before it's easy to switch between dev and prod? Right, this is how you would do that. So, and no, it doesn't show up when you hover over. I have no idea where that description shows up. Don't fill it out, it's a waste of time. Yeah. Okay, so notice when I do. We've got all of my tables over here. I've got my date table, my product table, my store table. I've got my measures table. Hey, that's fantastic. If I come over here to the left, I can't go look at the raw data. I can't change the relationship because it's none of my business to be doing that stuff anyways. Okay. Also notice I'm going to head over here to Measures. I'm going to take my total sales measure and I'm going to drag it here. And when I do, it's going to take a little longer than normal for it to render. The reason it's taking longer than normal is that the model doesn't live on my computer. The Power BI desktop says, okay, here's the query that I need to go to summarize my data. It sends that query up to the cloud. The cloud then processes it, finishes it, and sends the results back. And that just takes a little bit longer. It's still pretty fast. Okay. Okay. So does that bit make sense? Okay. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Home. But that's a really terrible visual. Let me add one thing to that. I'm going to go here to Products, and I'm going to take Product Line and drag that into Access. What a stunning visual that is. Okay, good. Question? Microphone?
So we talked about adding visualizations, but what about enabling so that certain people cannot delete pages?
Cannot delete report pages?
Report pages, yes.
I don't think that's...
We're not capable at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's just sort of a different thing because when you can't change somebody else's existing report unless you have you're in that work group. This is for building brand new, completely from scratch reports with an existing data set.
Understood.
Yeah. But yeah, go for it.
So the certified datasets that we have built often have literally zip visuals, right?
Yep.
So it's just a damn model, really. And that's a nice way to make it really clear, the distinctions. Was that sort of what you were addressing? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see what you're
Just
saying.
keep visuals out of it. And then everyone knows it's a data set.
Yes. Okay, good. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go. Oh, question. Yes.
You can also put a front page on there with a big warning message saying this is a data model and you should not add pages to it. You know,
Yeah.
I've seen Brian do that. I do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it works pretty well. Pretty well. Okay, so what I'm going to do, see, so I'm going to head up here to home. I'm going to go to publish. I'm going to save these changes. What do I want to call this thing? Very fancy report. Very fancy report. Oh, so fancy. Okay, and it's going to say, hey, where do you want to publish it? Notice I have many, many workspaces available to me. I'm going to push this thing to demo shared datasets receive. Right, this is the other app workspace. This will be very, very quickly, very, very quick, because there's almost nothing in this report, right? Just like that, it's done. I'm going to hit got it. And now, when I head back here, I go to Workspaces. Let me zoom in so you can see it. I go to Workspaces. However, yep, the shared datasets receive. And if I go in there, sure enough, there's my very fancy report. I could click on it and see my very fancy visual, right? Works just like that. Also notice, if I head back to the app workspace, if I go to datasets, it's added a dataset, right? But it's got a little link right there, so pay attention to the link. And just like before, I click on the ellipsis, and there's no delete button. You can't even do it. Yep. Questions? Yes, in the back.
Can you make a sub data set of this data set and certify that?
You can, but you'd be forking the PBX file. You'd basically be making a copy of the file and then doing it that way, which, I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it's kind of a hack, and so you should treat it like a hack, right?
Like, if I was in charge of like the bagel division.
You're in charge of the bagel division, yeah.
I would want just sales that have to do with bagel, right? And not like scones and coffee and stuff. And so
That could be used for data flows. So you could have that group maybe provisioning that bagel data with the data flow, and then another group provisioning the muffins. Is that what,
Yeah, muffins, bagels and muffins, that's right, yes.
And then the data set could be made up of those two data flows too.
Other thing you could do is you could add, I mean, depending on whether performance is an issue or not, you could also just add a report, a little filter to like bagels. I mean, like, I get that that's not exactly what you're talking about, yeah.
if that's like a huge data set, right? Like
Yeah, if it's an enormous data set or there's performance issues or there's specific calculations that only make sense for bagels that don't make sense for coffee, yeah, that might make sense. Question?
Could you use a context filter in that case?
Like,
So a context filter for bagels. So if you have this is only bagel, could you add the context filter for bagel here? So almost like doing a different level of security. So you have one
Yeah.
data set and you have that data set being shared, and it's shared to different PBIT files or PBIX files with different security models.
well, so the security model would have to live in the one PBIX file, but you could, within that PBIX file, say, hey, you know what, I'm going to add a role of security that enforces, depending on who logs in, if they're in the bagel division, because they have their own division now, they see bagel stuff. If you're in the coffee division, you just see coffee stuff. That could be a good way to do it as well. More questions? Yes.
So back in the service, where you have
Yes.
that little stub data set.
Yep.
That's in the new workspace. So have you played around with the security on that yet? Because I noticed there's a little link to create under actions, create more reports. The little
That guy right there?
that guy.
Yeah.
So if I have access to the broadcast workspace and I create a report and I publish it into the receiving workspace.
Yeah. Does anybody else in that workspace now have access to build it?
Yes.
You know, I haven't tested that. My guess would, I think they do. Or
actually that you would speak to this, but
Let's speak to some of it.
when you build a certified data set and then people are starting to build reports off of that, and then you decide to delete something out of the certified data set, you have to have business processes in place that are going to alert those people. So it's not something completely trivial to think about the architecture of your business process around this. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. There you go.
That lineage.
That's what I meant to say. What's that? Yeah.
So if you have a workspace with protected data sets,
Mm-hmm.
and then somebody who has access to that workspace publishes a report into an unprotected workspace,
Suddenly you have
sudden
a.
your protected data set is in an unprotected workspace where more people can build more reports.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm just saying those lineage features sound really exciting because the change control is going to be very important on that because
Yep.
if you have a specific measure that you need to change or some dimensions that you're going to change, you need to do more than notify. You need to identify every single report that's going
Yes.
to be impacted by that and be able to change that in a dev environment before you're going to roll out that change.
Yeah. In fact, I'll say I think this is something that's coming because it's not a problem. It's not a huge problem right now, but it's going to become a much bigger problem very quickly. And I know this from the video world, ironically enough. So I'll show you. Okay.
Brian?
Yes. Oh, was there another? Yeah.
To answer that question, though, you can get some of that information today through the PowerShell commandlets, but you have to know how to use them all.
Yep. Okay, so let me show you the big problem. There's others too that I'll talk about with. I'll probably cut the next section a little bit shorter, but here's the big problem that you want to be very thoughtful of when you start to build these things, okay? So hey, here I've got my very fancy report, right? And if you'll notice, this is total sales by line, and if you come over here, notice I've dragged the line column from the products table here into the access, right? Everybody see that? Okay, nothing up my sleeve? Okay, so let's say that the person who built the data set says, oh, whoops, I spelled it incorrectly, right? That line, that should be lines with a Z, because that's the correct way to spell it, right? So I come over here, I do lines like that, okay? So who thinks this is going to work flawlessly? I already told you it's not going to. Yeah, right, okay. So what's the problem right now? Anybody got a guess? That other report is looking for a column called line in the products table, right? It has no way to know that I just changed the name of this column, right? So I'm going to go ahead, save the changes, it'll republish it. And this isn't a super duper hard problem for Microsoft to have a solution for. I just don't think it's enough of a headache for enough people yet for them to have built it. I'm sure it's coming because this is going to be a big problem down the way, right? So, yep, replace the existing data set. Be pretty fast, it's not very big. I thought there were, but it doesn't seem to use those as the reference. So, come on, you can do it. There you go. Okay. So maybe I'm wrong, and I'll look really silly. But if I come up here to Home and hit refresh, okay, it breaks, right? Because it goes to find that column and it can't find it. And the worst part is, right now, the tool for fixing that is there is no tool. You have to remember what the column was. Go find it and redrag it, right? What I'm guessing will come in the next 4 months, you'll be able to right-click on this error, and it'll say point to the correct field. You'll go click on it, and then it'll fix itself. But it's not there yet, okay? This means when you're building these certified data sets, be very careful about getting the names of columns right because they're very, very difficult to change down the line. The definition of the column, no big deal if it's like a custom column. If it's a measure, as long as the name is the same, change the formula all you want, it'll work perfectly. The name itself, though, you got to be careful with. Yes?
A company's data governance should take that into consideration when they're making the
Yes.
names of these items. They have to define that item, and they should have a data dictionary in place. So, like, line should stay line for
Yeah.
forever unless there's like a big change. And I would think that if there was a change big enough to change a data item after a governance committee has approved that,
Yes.
that everyone would know.
Yes, yeah. And then I think that's a pretty good segue to, I think, my next section. Let me pop back over to PowerPoint. So design planning, okay, that's how you do the thing. What are some things to think about when you're getting ready to do it? Come on. There we go. Okay, building a semantic model. This is no longer optional, okay? So what do we mean by a semantic model? That's a fancy way of saying, what does the data model look like when a report author connects to it, right? What are the names of things that they see? Is stuff that should be hidden from them? If they use a measure, does it always work, or does it sort of bizarrely fail for no particular reason? Things like that, okay? So when you're building one of these certified data sets, you want to make sure that your names are what we would call friendly names. So all of that fact sales, that stuff should go away, right? If you have a dim customers table, call it customers, because your report authors don't know what a dimension table is, okay? You want to have context durable measures. So I'll show you an example of that. See, let me pop out here. So here I'm in my coffee shop report. I'm just going to go to the very fancy report. Okay. If I take total sales over here, and I break it down by lines again, you should get the same result, right? That's cool. Okay, cool. That part works pretty well. Okay. If I take espresso balance, this is how many pounds of espresso, I should say how many kilograms of espresso do we have in the back of the store on a nightly basis? If I take this out, and I break it down by store, break it down by store name there, and I'll turn this into a table. And zoom in just a smidge. Right? For every single store, sure enough, we see that's the last balance we have for their espresso stock. That's how many kilograms of espresso they've got. Everybody's happy, everything's good, okay? However, if I take espresso balance, again, over here, and I try and break it down by product, let's do lines again, that's a good one. A fun one. We get the exact same number for every single product. Any BI professionals want to tell me why? Or just common sense folks? One or the other? Doesn't exist. Okay? If you think about kilograms of espresso, how many kilograms of espresso do I have for lattes versus mochas? They're all the same thing. They don't break down. It's an unconformed dimension. I haven't done anything wrong other than I need to fix that measure such that if a person tries to use it on a product, it nulls out. Or it does a -1 or something that's really obvious that it's an error. You could even leave it like this, but you need to do what makes the most sense for people that will be obvious and meaningful. Okay? This is a problem. Okay? Questions about that? Okay. I think you guys get the idea behind naming things correctly, so I'll skip past that. Okay. I think it's worthwhile as a company to sort of have some sort of a tiered system for certification. As of right now, you've only got one stamp for either certified or not certified, but you could use things like naming conventions to say, okay, I do have a bunch of different certified data sets, but they're at different levels of trust, okay? The idea being that you want to make sure that there's some level of trust that is sort of the grand gold standard for trust. This is something that if somebody floats these numbers up to the C-suite, nobody's going to be surprised, everybody's going to be happy. At the same time, you want to have data sets that are less trusted, but that's okay. Like, so for instance, right now, the tiered system I'm sort of imagining is based on whose version of the truth is it. You have a tier 1 certified data set, that's your company's version of the truth. This is the most official version. You spent a ton of IT resources building this thing, right? And it doesn't have a lot of stuff in it. It's got a small number of measures and a small number of dimensions. The key is it works no matter how you twist it and turn it. Very, very reliable, okay? Now, the downside of that is you spent a lot of time and energy actually building this thing out. There might be other data sets that you want to share with people. It just doesn't warrant having that much labor put after it, right? So you could have a tier 2 certification saying, okay, this is the department's version of the truth. We still want it to be pretty good, but it doesn't have to be as completely perfect as the tier 1. And you can also have a tier 3 that says, oh, this is this team's version of the truth. Again, we want to make sure it goes through some processes, but we don't want to make the bar so darn high that there's no use for certified data sets in the organization. Okay? If you don't want to have this tiered system, you basically need to be able to pick one definition and say that's what certification means. Okay? Because if it means multiple things, people are going to think it's unreliable and they're going to give up on it. Okay? Questions about that? Comments? War stories? Okay. So I'm going to run through this. What about promoted? So certified basically means that's the official vetting process. I recommend having some sort of tiered system. It could be gold, silver, bronze, whatever you do, just have different layers. Promoted to me it's the informal vetting process, right? Those aren't bad. It just means it hasn't gone through an official process of determining that it's good, okay? So don't think higher is better, okay? So if you build a report, right, wherever you are in your report, you basically have some choices. If you want to make the report more reliable, it's going to cost flexibility, right? So if you're sitting here on this curve of possible reports, if you want to make this thing more reliable, you can move up the curve, and sure enough, it becomes more reliable, but it becomes less and less flexible as you move up the curve. And the further you move up the curve, the more cost there is for making it more reliable, right? And so the idea here is you want to make sure you tailor these things so that you have multiple reports that sort of map to the actual either certification tier or promoted status, right? So up here for tier 1, that's going to be the most reliable and the least flexible, right? That's going to be something you spend a whole lot of time and a whole lot of energy doing, and it's going to be pretty small, but it's going to be super duper reliable. But that's not the only thing you want in your organization. You also want these other certifications, these other data sets that are more and more flexible, because flexibility is a good thing. You just don't want those numbers floating up quite as high in the organization. Okay? I'm burning through this kind of fast. Any questions about that? Okay, everybody wants to go. Okay. If you're an organization, before you try and implement certified datasets, try and get a couple dimension tables out there. This will help you quite a bit. If for nothing else, that reason that I just showed you, where you want the names of columns to remain identical, if there's an existing customers column, an existing products table, customers table or products table, it will cut those problems in half, right? Also, if you can do it, if you can't do those other things, because that can be kind of tricky, at least try and get like a calendar table out there. Because I can't tell you the number of organizations I go to where there's like 9 different calendar tables and they all have different definitions in them. If you could surface a calendar table for people, at least they get the idea that, oh, I get it. There are centralized tables that I can use that are more reliable. I don't have to build my own, okay? And if you can't do that, try and at least work with snowflakes, right? So if you've got a big company where trying to figure out what your official DIM products table is going to be a 4-year effort, you could probably figure out, all right, I've got a 12-row table that has my different product lines. That won't take 1.5 years. That'll take a couple weeks to get people to agree on it, right? And at least you've got something that people can agree on. Okay. I will say there's 2 kinds of data sets. There's generalized data sets. This is what BI pros think of it. This is going to have lots of different dimension tables. It's designed to handle a lot of different kinds of questions. There's also operational data sets. Those are things that an analyst will often think of as a data set. Those are much more targeted with a specific number of questions. Usually it's one table that has 1 row for customer who's going to churn, or 1 row for a defective shipment or something like that. Every row maps to an action item. One isn't good or bad, they're just different. And also, if you've got these operational data sets and you've got premium, try to create these as data flows. They're a slightly better candidate for that. Okay. What about your buddy analysis services? I'll publish this slide so you can see it. We've already talked enough. Analysis services isn't going away completely, but if you're an organization that doesn't have any analysis services models, there's a good chance you're just not going to need them in the future. Okay? If you already have them, though, they have some nice bells and whistles. Okay, so I think I'm just going to publish this because we're running a little late on time. Greg, how are we on time? 2 minutes? Okay. 2 minutes. Yeah. So how do you give people build permission, right? The easiest way to do it is to give them access to the workspace that the data set lives in. That's fine. Don't rely on that as an organization. That's a terrible way to do it, right? The 2 better ways to do it, the one that I really recommend the most is direct permission. And what that is if you actually go to a data set, like let me pop over here to Power BI. I want to make sure I go to the broadcast version of this thing. If I go to data sets and I go to the ellipsis, there's this manage permissions. If I click on that, I could add individual users, or I could add, more importantly, Active Directory groups. And they don't have to become a member of the workspace to get this permission. They can not be a member of the workspace and it still works. This is how I recommend doing it. You can also, just to go back to my slides real quick, you can also publish an app, and there's a little checkbox on the app. I'll show it to you. When you publish an app, there's this little checkbox down here that says allow users to connect to the app's underlying data set using the build permission. If you turn that on, anybody who has read access to the app will be able to write reports off of it. only turn that on is if you're working with a single data set that is very, very trusted, which is to say, generally speaking, don't turn it on. But if you've got that, that could work. OK, so I think I've talked just about enough. There's some gotchas in there. Any other questions? We can all go home. Yes. Analyze in Excel, I believe they do. I believe they added it specifically for that. Also, there's a new feature where they can make a copy of their report in their own workspace, and that is based off of that logic as well. If you turn that off, they won't be able to do that.
Initially, when they deployed shared data sets, you had to have build rights to do download to Excel. And everyone freaked out because they didn't want to open up their whole data set just so people could download to Excel. And so I think they made the change, or maybe it's coming soon, because no one liked that black or white. They split it to be a gray so that now if you have, I believe, read writes on the data set, you can download the summarized data, but then if you do have build rights, you can download the underlying data. It's not analyzing Excel, but it's
yeah. Other questions? I still got plenty of time. Yeah. Great. That's it. Thank you all very much. Thank you.